It began not with a scream, but with silence. A silence so heavy it clung to the walls of an abandoned house at the edge of town, where no one had lived for decades. Emma wasn't searching for anything when she stepped inside on a shelter from the sudden storm, yet her hand brushed against a loose panel beneath a rotting window frame, and there it was, a small leather-bound diary, its cover cracked, its pages stained with time. The air shifted as she touched it, as if the house itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. She should have left it there. But Emma opened the journal, and with the first line, she realized this wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was a confession someone had buried, hoping it would never be found. The words on the first page were faint, written in a hand that trembled across the yellowed paper. Ink had bled and spread with the passing of decades, but the message remained intact enough to read. Emma's eyes lingered on the first sentence, struck by the weight of it. "If you are reading this, then I am already gone." A chill rippled down her arms. The storm outside pounded against the fragile walls, rain slicing through broken panes of glass, but inside she could hear something else, something subtle. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was presence, the intangible sensation of being watched. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was nothing more than nerves, but her pulse quickened all the same. She kept reading. The diary was not a neat record of days or memories. It was fragmented, scattered across the pages in entries that seemed rushed, frantic, and half erased by time. The handwriting shifted from elegant to erratic, as if the person who wrote it had endured a torment that grew worse with every passing line. Emma turned the pages carefully, finding phrases that refused to let her go. "They told me not to look. The door only opens at night. If I disappear, know that I tried to warn you." Her breath caught. Whoever had written these words had not meant them to be poetry or riddles. They were desperate attempts to preserve truth before it was swallowed. Emma's fingers trembled as she traced the jagged underlining of certain words, the way the pen had pressed too hard into the paper, scoring the surface as if paint itself had leaked into the ink. Lightning illuminated the room, washing the space in a stark white glow for only an instant. But in that instant, Emma saw the house differently, saw the water-stained wallpaper peeling like skin, saw shadows stretched unnaturally long, saw the place as something alive rather than abandoned. The diary seemed to hum faintly in her hands, its leather binding warmer than it should have been. She flipped another page. "There are footsteps that do not belong to the living." Emma swallowed hard. The storm outside roared louder, but the words in front of her were louder still, echoing inside her head. She wondered who had lived here before the house decayed, who had written this journal. Why had they hidden it inside a wall, behind a panel no one would think to move? She glanced around the room as if expecting to find someone still lingering, someone who had been waiting all these years for her to uncover what was never meant to be uncovered. The entries began to spiral, the handwriting breaking into near-legible scrawls. Dates appeared and disappeared. Some pages carried entire paragraphs crossed out so violently the paper had nearly torn. Yet beneath the fury, words remained. Emma read them with growing unease. "I saw her again. She stands at the foot of the stairs. The knocking will not stop. Do not go into the cellar." Emma felt her chest tighten as if the words themselves were a command reaching across time, binding her. She looked toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. The narrow staircase disappeared into shadow, and somewhere below, hidden behind layers of dust and years of silence, was the cellar the writer had begged her never to enter. She wanted to close the diary, to leave it where she found it, to run out into the storm and never look back. But something in her resisted. Curiosity was only part of it. The rest was compulsion. She had touched this object, broken the seal of its secrecy, and now it clung to her like a second heartbeat. To abandon it would be impossible. She flipped to the final page that still bore legible ink. It was shorter than the rest. Only a single line had been written there, but it was carved deep, as if the writer had gouged the paper with the tip of the pen. "If you hear her name, do not answer." Emma's lips moved silently, mouthing the words without speaking them aloud. The room felt suddenly colder, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves strained to listen. She shut the diary and clutched it tightly against her chest. The storm outside seemed endless, but the silence inside the house had deepened on Emma. Tried to steady her breathing, telling herself she was being irrational. It was just a book, just a forgotten journal left behind by someone who might have been ill, someone lost to history. That was all. Yet when she moved toward the door, a sound froze her in place. It was faint, barely there, but it was real. A whispered dot, not from the storm, not from the shifting timbers of the old house, but from the floor below. The cellar. Emma's hands went cold. She pressed her back against the wall, diary gripped so tightly her knuckles whitened. The whisper came, again, softer this time, almost coaxing, curling upward through cracks in the floor. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew with a certainty that made her stomach twist. The voice was calling for her. She should have fled, but instead she found herself moving down the hall, each creak of the floorboards sounding too loud. The staircase loomed, its banister broken, steps warped and swollen from years of neglect. The whisper grew clearer, threading through the storm as if the storm itself couldn't drown it out. She reached the top of the stairs and froze. A shadow shifted at the bottom, sliding across the floor without a body to cast it. Her throat tightened, but something within her urged her forward, as though the diary in her hands was pulling her step by step. She descended slowly, heart pounding in rhythm with each groan of the wooden steps. The cellar door waited at the bottom, its surface scarred with deep scratches that looked too deliberate to be age or decay. She reached for the rusted knob, and the moment her fingers brushed it, the whisper ceased. The silence that followed was suffocating. She twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The air that spilled out was damp, colder than the storm, carrying with it a scent of earth and iron. She stepped inside, guided only by the pale light from above. The cellar walls were stone, slick with moisture, and in the corner stood something that made her breath falter. A chair, old, splintered, positioned facing the wall, and on it lay a second book, identical in shape and binding to the one she held. Emma felt her body lock in place. The journal in her hands seemed heavier, warmer, as though reacting to its twin. She took one hesitant step closer, and the floor beneath her groaned as though warning her back, but she ignored it, drawn toward the chair, toward the second diary that waited like a trap laid decades before. Her fingertips brushed its cover, and before she could lift it, the whisper returned, this time not from the floor below, but from right behind her. Emma froze. The voice was so close it seemed to curl against the back of her neck, intimate and cold. Every instinct told her to turn, to see what had breached the silence, but terror anchored her in place. The cellar pressed inward with its damp walls and heavy air, her only company the two journals, one clutched to her chest, the other resting on the chair as though waiting for her hand. She forced herself to turn, breath shallow, body trembling. The cellar stretched behind her in stillness. There was no one there, no figure waiting in the shadows, no shape lingering in the doorway. Only the whisper remained, fading into the stone until it seemed to dissolve. Emma shut her eyes tight, trying to will the fear away, but when she opened them again, the second journal was no longer on the chair. Her breath caught. The seat was empty, dust clinging to the grooves of wood where something heavy had sat for years. And yet, she knew she had seen it, had felt its presence even more than its weight. The diary in her hands felt alive now, its warmth pulsing faintly through the cracked leather. She staggered back, pressing herself against the wall. Her eyes scanned the cellar for the missing book. And then she saw it, resting on the steps she had descended only moments earlier, as if someone had moved it there while her eyes were closed. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry, her pulse ringing in her ears. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped toward it, her shoes brushing the dust on the floor. Each sound seemed amplified, filling the suffocating silence. She crouched, extending a hand, but stopped just before touching the second journal. Something inside her resisted. She remembered the warning written in the first book, if you hear her name, do not answer. This was a trap. She could feel it. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to climb the stairs, abandon the house, and never return. But her body betrayed her. The moment her fingers brushed the second journal, the storm outside shifted. Thunder rumbled like a voice rising from the earth, and the whisper behind her grew louder, closer, almost tangible. She clutched both books, now, the weight of them pulling against her arms like anchors. The cellar door slammed shut. Emma spun, heart hammering, but the door was sealed. No draft had done that. No accident. Something wanted her down here. She stumbled backward into the shadows, both journals pressed against her chest, searching desperately for another way out. Her eyes darted across the stone walls until she noticed it, a narrow passage carved into the wall behind the chair. She couldn't tell if it was a tunnel or simply an unfinished part of the foundation, but it gaped like an open wound. The whisper was louder now, threading through the stones, curling into her ears. She couldn't make out words, only coaxing, as though trying to guide her deeper. Against every reason screaming inside her, she stepped into the passage. The air grew colder, the ground uneven beneath her feet. The smell of damp earth thickened until it was hard to breathe. The tunnel stretched farther than she expected, bending downward into the darkness. The faint light from the cellar vanished behind her until all she had was the flicker of lightning, bleeding through cracks in the foundation. Her hands shook as she opened one of the journals, desperate for any kind of guidance. She flipped through brittle pages until a new phrase leaped out at her, as though the ink had darkened just for her. Eyes, the passage leads where the voices sleep. Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to stop reading, to close the book and hurl it into the shadows. But she couldn't. The words seemed to speak directly to her, guiding her step by step deeper into the earth. She turned the corner and her breath caught in her throat. The passage opened into a chamber carved from raw stone. The walls were etched with marking spirals, symbols, lines intersecting in patterns she didn't understand. They shimmered faintly as though reflecting a light that didn't exist. In the center of the chamber stood a table made of stone, and on it lay fragments of objects that seemed out of place. Broken glass, tarnished jewelry, pieces of photographs warped by moisture. All offerings, she realized. Offerings left for something. Emma approached slowly, her eyes drawn to a photograph half buried beneath rusted metal. She brushed the dirt away and froze. The image was blurred, water damaged, but she could still make out the face. It was her own reflection. staring back from decades past, impossible yet undeniable. Her stomach twisted, and she stumbled backward. The journals slipped from her grasp, landing open on the stone floor. Their pages fluttered, settling on words that seemed to echo through the chamber. "Do not let her find you." The whisper erupted into a chorus. Voices filled the chamber, overlapping, rising in tones, both male and female, young and old. They called from the walls, from the floor, from the hollow air. Emma clamped her hands over her ears. But the voices weren't just sounds, they were inside her head, threading through her thoughts. Then, amidst the chaos, one voice rose clearer than the rest, a woman's voice, steady, deliberate. "Emma." Her breath froze. The journal's warning rang in her mind. "If you hear her name, do not answer." The voice spoke again, softer, coaxing. "Emma, I've been waiting." Her knees buckled, and she fell against the cold stone, eyes fixed on the journals. Their ink bled, lines shifting as though freshly written, forming new words across the pages. She watched in horror as the sentence took shape. "Answer her, and you will belong to the house." The chamber pulsed. The markings on the walls glowed, faintly, breathing with some rhythm not her own. Emma shook her head violently, pressing her lips shut, refusing to speak. The voice persisted, patient and relentless. "Emma, I know what you've seen. I know what you've read. All of it is mine. Give me the books, and I will let you go." Her fingers closed around the journals instinctively. They were her only tether, her only proof that what she was experiencing wasn't madness. Yet part of her wondered if the books themselves were the trap, if they were the reason she had been lured here at all. The chamber darkened as the storm outside fell silent. No thunder, no rain, only the suffocating pressure of the underground. Ere Emma forced herself to stand, her body trembling. She clutched the journals tightly and staggered toward the passage, desperate to return to the cellar, but the tunnel was gone. Where the narrow corridor had been, only solid stone remained. The chamber had sealed itself, leaving her trapped in a room that breathed like a living thing. The voices grew louder, circling her, until she could no longer distinguish one from another. They overlapped, whispered, demanded, begged, and through it all, the woman's voice persisted, calm and commanding. "Say my name." Emma squeezed her eyes shut, refusing. Her throat burned with the effort of silence, tears streaking her face. She opened one of the journals again, searching for some last clue, some salvation. The ink bled faster now, entire lines dissolving, leaving only fragments visible. "One will lead you out, one will bury you." Her eyes darted between the two books, both identical, both pulsing faintly in her hands. One of them carried her only hope. The other carried her end. She had no way of knowing which was which. The chamber trembled, dust sifting from the ceiling as the voices reached a fever pitch. The woman's voice rose above them, sharp and urgent. "Emma, choose." Emma's hands shook as she looked down, at the journals. One felt heavier, pulling at her arms as though it belonged to the stone itself. The other felt impossibly light, almost hollow. Her heartbeat pounded in her skull as the markings on the walls flared brighter, burning her vision. She had only seconds left. She shut her eyes and chose. Her hands trembled violently as she drew one of the journals closer to her chest. She did not know why she had chosen this one, perhaps instinct, perhaps desperation, but the instant she clutched it, the chamber reacted. The glowing markings along the stone walls dimmed, flickering like candles on the verge of dying out. The voices, once a deafening chorus, broke apart into scattered whispers, fracturing, fading, resisting. Emma staggered backward, pressing her spine against the wall, her breathing uneven. The chosen book pulsed with warmth, steady as a heartbeat, while the other lay discarded on the stone floor, dark and inert, as though it had never been alive at all. She glanced at it once, only once, because looking at it too long made her chest tighten with a sense of finality she couldn't bear. The woman's voice cut through the silence, colder now, threaded with fury. "You've made the wrong choice." Emma's lips parted, but no words escaped. The temptation to answer was overwhelming, to ask who this presence was, what she wanted, but the warning rang louder than fear. "If you hear her name, do not answer." The air grew heavy. The walls of the chamber shuddered, dust raining from cracks. Above, Emma stumbled forward, clutching the journal as if it alone could shield her. The discarded book on the floor began to smoke, its pages curling inward, ink boiling into black stains that bled across the stone. The woman's voice rose, again, less human now, jagged like broken glass scraping against itself. "You cannot leave." Emma turned toward the wall where the passage had once been. To her astonishment, a faint outline shimmered there, as though the stone itself was weakening, thinning. She pressed the journal to her chest and moved toward it, each step echoing, unnaturally loud in the chamber. Her free hand touched the rock, and it rippled beneath her fingers like the surface of water. The voices wailed, 100 tones crying out at once, desperate to drown her in sound. But Emma pushed forward, stepping into the trembling stone. It resisted her, pulling at her limbs like mud, but the journal in her hands glowed faintly, easing her passage. With one final step, she fell through the wall and collapsed onto the cellar floor. The house was silent. Emma gasped. The weight of the chamber's air lifted from her lungs. She lay sprawled on the wooden boards, rain echoing faintly against the broken windows above. The storm had quieted, reduced to a steady drizzle. For a moment she thought she had escaped, but the cellar was not as she remembered it. The chair remained splintered and waiting, yet the scratches on the cellar door were gone, the dust disturbed, the corners cleaner than they had been. The air smelled fresher, less suffocating. Emma rose unsteadily to her feet, clutching the journal tight. She stepped toward the door and twisted the knob. It opened easily, swinging into a hallway that should not have existed, instead of the ruined, water-stained corridor she had entered earlier. The hall stretched clean and well-kept, lined with wallpaper untouched by time. Lamps glowed faintly along the walls, their light warm and steady. The house was alive, not abandoned. Emma's heart stuttered. She turned back to the cellar, but it too had shifted. The stone walls were smooth, the dampness gone, the air clear. It was as if she had been pulled into the house as it once was, a reflection of its past preserved in some other layer of time. A voice drifted from the end of the hall, not a whisper this time, but soft, almost melodic. She tightened her grip on the journal, her feet carrying her forward despite the fear clawing at her chest. The hall opened into a parlor, its furniture intact, its curtains drawn against the storm outside. A fire burned in the hearth, crackling, though no one tended it. And there, seated in a high-backed chair, was a woman. Her hair fell dark and loose around her shoulders, her dress a faded shade of gray. Her face was pale, her eyes luminous in a way that unsettled Emma, as though light itself had been trapped inside them. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I told you not to choose," the woman said softly. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She did not answer, terrified that to speak would bind her in some unbreakable way. The woman's gaze lowered to the journal Emma clutched, and a thin smile touched her lips. "You hold what was never meant to be read. Every word in that book belongs to me." And now, her voice softened further, though the threat in it was unmistakable. "So do you?" Emma stepped back instinctively. The journal's warmth intensified, as though it sensed her fear and tried to protect her. She wanted to run, to flee through the door behind her, but when she glanced back, the parlor's entrance had vanished. The walls had closed, trapping her inside the room with the woman by the fire. The woman rose slowly from the chair, her movement unnervingly graceful, every motion deliberate. Emma's legs weakened, her body begging to collapse, but she forced herself to remain standing. "I don't want this," Emma whispered before she could stop herself. The woman's eyes sharpened, her smile widening. "You've already accepted it by touching the book. You chose me." Emma's throat closed around her words. She clutched the journal tighter, desperate to resist. Its pages fluttered suddenly, turning as if guided by unseen hands. A new sentence appeared across the parchment, scrawled in ink that had not been there before. "She cannot hold you if you remember." Emma blinked, the words searing into her mind. Remember what? She searched the fragments of the diary she had read, the warnings, the scattered notes. Remember the voices, the passage, the photographs. Remember that this house was not hers. The woman stepped closer, her presence suffocating. "Give it to me." Emma shook her head, her voice shaking no. The air around them crackled. The fire in the hearth flared, shadows stretching tall along the walls. The woman's form wavered, her edges unraveling like smoke, her voice splitting into multiple tones. "You cannot leave unless I allow it, and I do not allow it." Emma's knees gave way, and she fell hard to the floor. The journal slipped from her grasp, landing open beside her. Its pages turned furiously, words scrawling themselves in a frenzy. She crawled toward it, desperate. As the woman's footsteps echoed closer, the final page settled, and a line appeared. "Speak what you remember, and the house will hear you." Emma's lips trembled. She pressed a hand to the page, forcing herself to recall every detail, the warnings written by trembling hands, the voices crying in the chamber, the photograph of her face buried in the offerings. Her voice cracked as she spoke aloud. "This isn't mine. This was never mine. You don't own me." The walls groaned. The fire roared. The parlor shook violently, dust falling from the ceiling. The woman's form flickered, her luminous eyes burning with fury. She lunged forward, reaching for the journal, but the house itself seemed to resist her. The wallpaper tore, the lamps shattered, the hearth split open. Emma clutched the book to her chest once more. The woman's scream filled the room, high and piercing, a sound not meant for human ears. The walls collapsed inward, the floor buckling beneath Emma's feet. She shut her eyes tight, bracing for the end, and then silence when Emma opened her eyes again. She was back in the cellar. The parlor was gone, the woman gone, the fire gone. Only the splintered chair remained, dust heavy in the air, storm faint outside. The journal lay quiet in her hands, its warmth gone, its pages blank. Every word had vanished. Emma stood slowly, her body trembling, and made her way to the cellar door. This time, it opened onto the ruined hallway she remembered. The house was decayed once more, the wallpaper peeled, the floor warped. The storm had ended, leaving only the hush of night. She should have left then. She should have walked away and never returned. But Emma knew the truth as she stood in the doorway, clutching the blank journal. The story wasn't finished. Behind her faintly, the whisper came again. Emma froze in the doorway, her hand pressed to the splintered frame, the blank journal heavy in her grasp. The whisper was softer now, so faint she almost convinced herself it wasn't real. Almost it wound through the silence like a thread, pulling at her, daring her to turn back. She should have run. She should have fled into the night, left the house behind and never returned. But some part of her knew that if she left now, the whisper would follow. It wasn't tied to the house anymore. It was tied to her. Emma stepped back into the hallway, her shoes crunching over broken plaster. The storm outside had passed, but the air within the house was heavier than before, thick with something unseen. She moved cautiously, every shadow a threat, every corner a trap. The journal's cover pulsed faintly in her palm, though its pages remained blank, its secrets erased or buried deeper. The whisper guided her, not in words, but in tones low, rising, falling, leading her step by step up the warped staircase. She resisted at first, but resistance only made the sound sharper, cutting into her mind until she couldn't ignore it. So she followed, unwilling, yet unable to stop. The second floor stretched in ruin. Ceilings collapsed, beams splintered, windows shattered, and yet, in the center of the hallway, a single door stood untouched. Its paint was unchipped, its knob polished, as though time itself had spared it. The whisper swelled as Emma approached, her pulse racing in her throat. She reached out and twisted the knob. The door opened easily, revealing a bedroom preserved as if sealed away from decay. Curtains hung unfrayed, a bed neatly made, dust absent from the polished wood of the dresser. On the nightstand sat a mirror framed in gold, its surface spotless, reflecting Emma's pale, frightened face back at her. The whisper ceased. Silence pressed in. Emma stepped inside, drawn to the mirror without understanding why. She stared at her reflection, waiting for it to move, to twist, to reveal the truth she already feared. Instead, the journal in her hand flared with heat. Its pages fluttered open violently, though still blank. And then, in the glass of the mirror, she saw words scrolling themselves across the reflected pages. "You belong here." Emma staggered back, the mirror rattling in its frame though she hadn't touched it. The reflection shifted, not wrong, not altered, but delayed. Her reflection's lips moved a second too late, her movements out of sync, as if she was watching not herself, but something wearing her skin, her throat constricted, panic rising. She dropped the journal onto the bed, its blank pages glowing faintly in the dim light. The reflection smiled, though Emma had not. Its teeth were too sharp, its eyes too wide. The woman's voice filled the room again. No longer a whisper, but a presence that seemed to echo from every wall. "You carried my words, you carried my name, though you did not speak it. And now, you will finish what was left undone." Emma shook her head violently. "No, this isn't mine." The reflection stepped closer to the glass, pressing its hand flat against the inside of the mirror. Emma's own hand twitched, rising unwillingly. Toward it, she fought the pull, nails digging into her palm, but the air thickened with a force she couldn't resist. Inch by inch, her hand drew closer to the cold glass. The journal flared again. Its blank pages began to bleed with new ink, sentences written in a frantic, jagged hand. Emma tore her gaze from the mirror and snatched it up, scanning the words, "Break the glass and her hold, but do not look directly into her eyes." Emma's breath came fast and shallow. She searched the room for something heavy, her eyes landing on the brass lamp atop the dresser. She lunged for it, gripping it tightly in both hands. The reflection grinned wider, lips parting as though to speak her name again. Emma didn't wait. She swung the lamp with every ounce of strength she had. The mirror shattered, glass exploding across the room, shards scattering across the floor. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was a chorus of voices collapsing into one, shrieking. As the glass fell, Emma shielded her face, the lamp clattering from her hands. The room trembled, the air thick with the sound of tearing, as though reality itself resisted what she had done. When the echo finally faded, Emma lowered her arms. The mirror was gone, not broken, not fractured, gone. In its place, only a bare wall remained, smooth and untouched. The journal lay on the bed, its pages once again blank. Emma sank to her knees, her body shaking, tears streaking her face. For the first time since entering the house, the silence felt real. No whisper, no voice, no pull. She wanted to believe it was over. She needed to believe it. She stood unsteadily, clutching the journal, and moved back through the hallway. The untouched door now hung rotted like the others, its wood warped, its knob rusted. The house had returned to ruin, as though the preserved room had never existed. Step by step, Emma descended the staircase. The boards creaked beneath her feet, dust swirling in the faint moonlight. She passed the parlor empty, the chair gone. She passed the cellar door sealed shut, its scratches deep again. The house had reset itself, swallowing the traces of everything she had seen. When she reached the front door, she hesitated. The night outside was calm, the storm gone, the air damp with rain. She pushed the door open, and for the first time since she entered the house did not resist her. She stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply. her lungs aching with relief. But as she walked into the night, one thought clung to her, heavier than the journal in her hand. The blank pages weren't empty, not really. They were waiting. Emma looked down at the book as she crossed the yard. Her reflection from the shattered mirror flashed in her mind, the smile that hadn't been hers, the delay in its movements. And then, faintly, too faintly to be coincidence, she saw it. On the first page, a single line appeared in fresh, wet ink. "She will follow." Emma dropped the journal as though it had burned her. It hit the grass softly, pages fluttering in the night breeze. She backed away, trembling, unable to tear her eyes from the words. The house loomed behind her, silent, but alive. Watching, waiting. Emma turned and fled down the road, her footsteps echoing in the damp night air. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't silence the truth that pressed against her mind, relentless and cold. The house had not let her go. Not really, and neither had the voice. For more untold truths, keep watching The Forgotten Cell.